Rain in Breath of the Wild is the most memed criticism lofted at Zelda's new entry. This condemnation is not without its merit, but I desire a more nuanced critique of this game mechanic. Varied weather systems play a huge role in diversifying the world of Hyrule. Snowy tundras, lava-engulfed mountainsides, and heavy downpour all have their unique way of directly affecting two major components of Breath of the Wild. It alters how our player tackles combat and traversal. We see this in game as Link begins to shiver or sweat and take damage if he's not properly guarded against these elements. The ability to traverse safely through these areas either requires a sacrifice in defense, having to switch to a new armor set that better handles the environment, or an exploration of the game's cooking mechanic, which in turn puts a time limit on your objective. In both decisions, the combat of the player now is retooled, as this acts as a seamless difficulty balance when the player progresses further in the game. The developers have to consider that every person could play through the Goron section at any time in their journey, so limitations on their abilities are there to better even the playing field if you're 5 hours in or 50 hours. But really, that's it. For these two weather conditions, its effect is less of a puzzle to solve and more of a reset of a player's traversal and combat abilities. Rain, on the other hand, is much more interesting mechanically. Before I get into that, the pure aesthetic addition Rain and the other weather has on the world is valuable. Variation in setting is important to selling this world as real. A dynamic rain system gives Hyrule part of its wonder. It's cool to notice how puddles form and slowly evaporate in real time, and the textures change to be a bit glossier in response to the storm. On this basic surface level, rain can be a positive thing, and no one really argues that point. It's how it alters Link's combat and traversal options where gripes begin to form. Snow and heat do not drastically change any of these elements like rain does. Rain is not messing around. The entire game is centered around climbing everything. It is a palpable sense of freedom, like the training wheels have been taken off open world games. Oh, I can't get there. Wait a second, what? Vertical movement? Whoa, hey, Link's moving up! In past Zelda games, you either had these very obvious vines signaling you can move up and down, or you're out of luck. So this change is pretty incredible. But when a storm rolls in, no more climbing. The game strips away the, in my opinion, most innovative thing it does with the genre. To my knowledge, only Minecraft before it was able to capture this purity and exploration within a 3D space. Breath of the Wild is often more rewarding and definitely more engrossing than Minecraft's overworlds, but a similar core exists with both. Everything is interactive. As long as a player has stamina, they can climb. As long as players have blocks to stack, they can also climb. Implementing a mechanic that arbitrarily limits the player function seems counterintuitive, making it pretty hard to explore, which isn't that great if that's kind of the point. And for the most of the game, the aesthetic value is all the player can appreciate. When the game is designed around these limitations, rain becomes a compelling puzzle element like in the To Yasa Shrine Challenge. The Thundra Plateau is in a permanent thunderstorm, and it explores how Link's traversal is altered by rain. It places the ball keys that are needed to unlock the shrine high up and out of reach. Assuming you don't have Revali's Gale, which makes this a cakewalk like most of the powers, the solution requires a lot of varied thinking. You can't just climb your way out of this one. I found my stride with stasis and arrows, but you could come from the mountain overhead and reach them that way. It's an interesting problem to solve that still allows variety in how to solve it. However, the Thundra Plateau does not have any enemies, so it does not test your combat with these limitations in a controlled environment. This would not occur until the Trial of Sword DLC, which is what spurred this video. Playing through the trials really tests your strategy. Not being able to take any champion abilities or items with you makes all the difference. Sizing the world down to a small room gives the player really precise challenges that require a good knowledge of the game's systems. As you would expect, they have permanent rain rooms that use this mechanic to instead limit your combat. Rain limits combat in Breath of the Wild by striking metal weapons with deadly lightning. Wood weapons often being weaker leads to creative uses of the environment and runes while analyzing the enemy's weakness. You can see how they place metal objects in the surrounding area not for the player to pick up and wield, but to lure an enemy towards when lightning strikes. Them being already rusted over makes their actual value to the player and their inventory pretty useless. Taking advantage of these things leads to victory. The problem is, this so often isn't the case for most of the game. Rain feels intrusive, with a steep punishment on someone just trying to get somewhere. Breath of the Wild works best mechanically in these small enclosed areas, as I explained in my last video analyzing Eventide Island. Those areas are few and far between, which is disappointing, especially having one of them be behind a DLC paywall. With most of the problems with Breath of the Wild, rain falls into the category of being underutilized or just a plain misused game mechanic, because I don't actually think it's a bad addition to the game. I've seen the evidence of inventive ways to use it, but it never builds on those. It ends up being somewhat shallow, and most of the players' interaction, possibly all of the players' interaction, with it is frustrating. The wonder of the world and the aesthetic value wear off quickly, and all that's left is the limitations without any level design to support them. When it actually does, it's extremely satisfying, and ultimately, I am glad it exists. I hope the franchise sticks with the new design philosophy of Breath of the Wild. I appreciate the change, but I want a more deliberately designed world to let all these fun mechanics intersect and play off each other like they do in Eventide Island and the DLC Trials. That's just my 2 cents on Raid and Breath of the Wild, but what other issues of Breath of the Wild do you think could have been improved upon? I'd like to hear your thoughts in the comments below. This is Second Look. You can follow me on Twitter at Second Look Games. Please remember to subscribe and like the video, and stay tuned for more.